New videos are coming soon on Jaguar Gator 8 and Jaguar Gator 7. Now that the new studio is up and running, we have time to commit to those channels again. Make sure to click the link in the description so you can subscribe to the channels now so you don't miss a moment of the action. And now, on with our feature presentation. This player right here is Seattle Seahawks quarterback Rick Mirer. And aside from the fact that he's known for being a pretty big bust in the NFL and the clear loser in the 1993 NFL Draft Sweepstakes between him and Drew Bledsoe, he's known for having one of the strangest contract clauses in the history of professional football. It was a contract clause so far out there and so bizarre that Commissioner Paul Tagliabue actually voided the contract and said that it was illegal. The contract had a clause called, quite simply, the end of the world clause, and it's exactly as it sounds. Mirer would get his salary fully guaranteed, even if the world ended. There was also another clause in this absolutely absurd contract that got voided that said that Mirer would be paid a bonus if the Seahawks won at least 2 out of 16 games. Keep in mind that Mirer didn't have to play a down for this to become active. So long as the Seahawks were not historically bad, he would get a hefty payday. No wonder that this contract was struck down, although I will say, it is highly creative. Impermissible under NFL rules and guidelines? Absolutely. But highly creative, and the kind of things that I would come up with just for fun in my contract drafting class? Oh, you bet. However, even though you might know about Rick Mirer and the infamous end of the world contract, what you might not know is that a decade before, or roughly a decade before, the Seahawks tried a similarly creative contract with this man right here. This is fullback John L. Williams, and unlike Mirer, Williams had a pretty successful career in the NFL with the Seahawks, and was 100% worth the draft pick, as he was one of the best fullbacks in the league. By the time his career in Seattle ended, he spent 8 seasons there, playing in the Kingdom from 1986 to 93, making it to 2 Pro Bowls, having 4 consecutive seasons from 1988 to 91 with over 1,100 yards from scrimmage, having 8,730 career yards from scrimmage, which was at the time the second most yards from scrimmage in franchise history, only behind the legendary wide receiver Steve Largent, and finishing inside the top 10 of the NFL in receptions 3 times, which was pretty impressive for anyone, let alone a fullback. Heck, he even made an immediate impact during the 1986 season, when, as a rookie, despite not scoring a single touchdown, and despite not finding the end zone once, he made such an impact that he was named the runner-up for AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, losing out to New Orleans Saints running back Ruben Mays. That's quite impressive. However, the process of getting him to Seattle in the first place, the process of getting him to sign the contract and sign his name on the dotted line, well, that was a, shall we say, interesting negotiation and an interesting contract that deserves to be broken down nearly 40 years later, because I'm not sure that anything like this could ever happen again in the National Football League. Because this is the story behind what might just be the strangest, yet unlike Rick Mirer, the most perfectly legal contract in the nearly half-century-long history of the Seattle Seahawks franchise. Buckle up. This is a wild one. Before I talk about the contract itself, we need some context to not only understand how rookie contracts worked back in the 1980s, but why the Seahawks even wanted John L. Williams in the first place. In 1985, even though expectations were high for the Seahawks, seeing as they made it to the playoffs in back-to-back years, and finished with a franchise-best record of 12-4 in 1984, the Seahawks disappointed by only mustering up an 8-8 record, missing the playoffs and finishing just 3rd in the AFC West, including 2 straight losses to close the season off. And the biggest reason, or at the very least, one of the biggest reasons why they struggled, especially down the stretch, where they lost 4 of their final 6 games, it had to do with a porous running game, as outside of the great Kurt Warner, they didn't really have anyone else who could reliably carry the football or provide any sort of impact out of the backfield. In 4 of the team's final 5 games, the Seahawks had under 100 rushing yards, and the team averaged just 87.6 yards per carry over those games, which was atrocious for the mid-80s, when teams were consistently averaging around 125 yards per game. By the time the season ended, out of 28 teams, the Seahawks ranked just 21st in rushing yards, 26th in rushing touchdowns with 9, with those being scored by just 2 players in Kurt Warner and quarterback Dave Craig, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, and 26th in yards per carry, averaging just 3.6 yards per carry at a time when the league-wide average was more than half a yard greater than that. If the Seahawks were going to bounce back in 1986, then they were going to need to improve drastically in the running department. And I mean really drastically. And that's why they drafted the man that you've been watching this whole time. As in the first round, with pick number 15, they drafted fullback John L. Williams out of the University of Florida. The pick made a ton of sense, especially since Williams was that dual threat that the Seahawks were desperately looking for, seeing as in 1985 with the Gators, Williams ranked inside the top 10 of the SEC in both rushing yards and receptions. Drafting him was the easy part. Making him the 3rd running back off the board, only behind Bo Jackson and Keith Byers, was the easy part. Getting him to actually sign a contract? Well, that was proving a little bit tougher. Remember that back in the mid-80s, there was no such thing as the rookie wage scale. Rookies could make however much they wanted. And with the threat of going to the Canadian Football League or the United States Football League, which was about to compete directly with the NFL in the fall of 1986, contracts had to be ridiculously high compared to previous years in order to lure players to come play. It's not like today, where you never see any holdouts, and a first-round pick holding out is the exception and not the rule. Everyone is signed by August. In 1986, if you got your first-round pick signed before training camp, count your blessings. And even though the Seahawks were having no trouble signing their other draft picks, as each of their other 10 draft picks, from Patrick Hunter in round 3 to John McVay in round 12, were signed before training camp started, there was one holdout. There was one measly holdout, which, as you might have been able to guess, was John L. Williams. It was a frustrating process, with both sides playing hardball. Everett Glenn, who was the agent of Williams, advised his client to sit out for the entire 1986 season, not sign a contract, and instead re-enter the draft in 1987, like Bo Jackson was planning on doing after the Tampa Bay Buccaneers completely screwed him over. To learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. Meanwhile, the Seahawks, who offered him a 5-year deal worth $1.62 million, including a signing bonus of $500,000, were not budging. When Mike McCormack, the president and general manager of the Seahawks, heard Glenn's threat, he said, "That's his prerogative. That's one of his alternatives." Said McCormack on the negotiation process and how close the team was, in an absolutely bizarre analogy, it's like the birthing of a baby. Who knows how close you are? I mean, I know when a baby looks like it's about to be due versus when the baby is nowhere close. I've got a pretty good feeling after 9 months that something's going to happen. And after 2 months, that something's not happening for a while. So where McCormack was going with that, I'm not sure. I really have no idea. But regardless, just like just about every other first-round pick back then, even if there was drama at the start, everything eventually got sorted out. The Seahawks and Williams eventually came to a deal, and Williams reported to camp a few weeks later after a tiny holdout, reporting as the team's starting fullback, just like head coach Chuck Knox envisioned. Which raises the question, what exactly was in this contract? Well, prepare yourself for one of the most ridiculous and most creative contracts of all time, where I think it's safe to say that Williams robbed the Seahawks high and dry with how these provisions were written. I've seen the usual incentives in contracts before, like making it to the playoffs, making the Pro Bowl, getting first-team All-Pro honors, playing time percentage, snaps played, and hitting certain incentives when it comes to rushing yards. But trust me, I've never seen anything quite like this. First off, Williams had to play at least 50% of the offensive snaps for the Seahawks. Alright, there's nothing unusual about that. We see snap incentives all the time. If he did not play 50% of the snaps, then none of the following incentives would apply. However, if he was on the field for at least half of Seattle's snaps on offense, then he would get money broken up into 3 tiers, all without having to actually do anything. If he played at least 50% of the snaps, then for every rushing yard that the Seahawks got during the season, Williams would receive $10. Keep in mind, this is not how many rushing yards Williams himself got. This is how many rushing yards the Seahawks as a team got. So if in some hypothetical, Kurt Warner would have busted off an NFL record-tying 99-yard touchdown run, even if Williams was not on the field for that run, Williams would receive $10 for each yard of that run, meaning that he didn't have to touch the ball, block anyone, or do anything. If that happened, he'd receive $990 just like that. But keep in mind, that is on the lower end of things. We're just getting started. If the Seahawks made the playoffs, that number would be bumped up to $15 for each yard. This is along with the usual playoff bonuses and whatnot that players get. So with that hypothetical, if a 99-yard run happened, and once again, Williams wasn't even on the field, if the Seahawks made the playoffs, he'd receive $1,485. And then comes the top tier. And how they came up with this one, I have no idea. What would you logically think that the top tier incentive would be? You would think it would be something like the Seahawks making or winning the Super Bowl if we're thinking about it from a team level. Or if we're thinking about it from an individual level, Williams winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, or starting all 16 games, or hitting 1,000 rushing yards on his own, or getting some sort of accolade from the Associated Press, or a Pro Bowl honor. But nope, because in the top tier, Williams would receive $20 for every single rushing yard that the team accumulated over the course of the 1986 season if the Seahawks finished inside the top 3 of the AFC in third down efficiency. Seriously. If the Seahawks were one of the top 3 teams out of the 14 teams in the AFC in third down percentage, then Williams would get $20 for every rushing yard. Even though, on a lot of third downs, you figured that the Seahawks would be throwing the ball, and Williams wouldn't be on the field or have any role to play. This seriously plays out like a Randy Edsall contract at UConn, where he got bonuses for doing random things like having a better third down percentage than his opponent, even if his team lost 65-7. The Seahawks weren't even that bad in 1985 on third downs. They converted 39.3% of the time, which was 9th in the NFL. But what I love about this bonus in particular, as if it wasn't perfect enough and crazy enough already, is the fact that it's so arbitrary. It's not top 3 in the NFL, it's top 3 in the AFC. Why that's the case, I have no clue. But that means that if the Seahawks have the 4th best third down percentage in football, but the 3 teams ahead of them are in the AFC, then the bonus does not convey. However, if the Seahawks only finish 10th in that category, but 7 of those teams above them are in the NFC, then the bonus conveys. It's such an insane provision that, I've got to be honest, I've never seen before, and makes no sense for those aforementioned reasons. However, if that bonus were to convey, and a 99-yard touchdown run happened, even if Williams did absolutely nothing on the play, he'd receive $1,980. The good news for Williams was that he played in all 16 games, easily playing more than 50% of the snaps in 1986. The bad news was that the $15 tier did not hit, seeing as the Seahawks did not make the playoffs, even though they finished the season with a 10-6 record. If you want to learn more about how the Seahawks played during that 1986 season, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, the great news was that the $15 tier didn't have to hit, because the $20 tier with third down percentage hit, as even though the Miami Dolphins led the NFL that season by converting a whopping 50.8% of their third downs, having one of the best seasons in league history in terms of third down efficiency, the Seahawks were second, ending the year with a 43.4% conversion rate, making 96 out of a possible 221 third downs. Oddly enough, the Seahawks did not have the same luck on fourth down, as they were the only team in the league that did not convert a fourth down all season. However, because the Seahawks converted 43.4% of their third down conversions, Williams got $20 for every single rushing yard that the Seahawks got in 1986. Williams himself had 538 rushing yards, which was barely 20% of the team's total output. And seeing as the Seahawks improved drastically in the running game from 1985 to 1986, jumping up from 21st to 5th in rushing yards, oh man, did Williams make out well. Because when you combine the 538 yards that Williams had, the 1,481 yards that Kurt Warner had, the 122 yards that Dave Craig had, the 149 yards that Randall Morris had, and the 10 yards that everyone else had, in total, the Seahawks had 2,300 rushing yards. Williams got a $20 bonus for each of those yards. Do the math and multiply 2,300 by 20, and you get a $46,000 bonus, which was a nice sum back in the 80s, even though Williams didn't even contribute to most of it. Today, that comes out to over $127,000. Williams made, in today's day and age, 6 figures without having to do anything. And obviously, this is not to minimize the contributions that Williams actually made in 1986, seeing as there was a reason he was the runner-up in Offensive Rookie of the Year, and seeing as he was a powerful runner and a solid blocker. However, he got this not because he did anything, but because his teammates did things, both in terms of getting rushing yards and converting third downs, of which Williams had very little, if anything, to do with. It actually got to a bizarre point where if you're Williams and you've got a 2nd and 2, you'd rather be stuffed and end up with 3rd and inches instead of getting the first down, since it increases your chances at getting a better payday. Heck, I love that if it's 3rd and 35 and you call a draw play just to get out of there without turning the ball over and put your quarterback in any danger, and you pick up 15 yards because the defense is dropping everyone back and they're not playing the run, you get an extra $300, even though the drive ended in an objective failure. It's such a backwards system, and I love every part of it. In the long run, I don't think the Seahawks were kicking themselves over this. Again, this is just a funny little detail in what was a highly successful career for one of the best runners and fullbacks in Seahawks history. This kind of money is pocket change for an NFL organization. And if it meant getting Williams to sign his contract, commit to the Seahawks, and then spend nearly a decade there as one of the top players at his position, then it was worth it. It was 100% worth it. But I still can't get over the fact that this provision, where Williams gets a bonus for every yard the team gets, even if he wasn't on the field for it, and where said provision is based on the team being one of the best in the league on third down, as in a down where Williams is probably not going to be on the field or touching the ball a lot on, is insane. It's a truly bizarre world contract that I'm not sure could happen again. Because when people say that third down is the most important down in football, as it's the down where games are won and lost, in 1986, that rang especially true for Seattle Seahawks fullback John L. Williams. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.